Hello everybody, this is Mr. Lawback. In this video we're going to go over the War of 1812, Part 1. Now the War of 1812 is often called the Second War of Independence for the United States, or the Forgotten War, or Mr. Madison's War. The War of 1812 was the first officially declared war that the United States took part in. So in this video we're going to talk about the lead up to the war, the causes of the war, those who were in favor of the war, those who were against the war, and how the actual declaration of war went down. So let's go back first a little bit. Jefferson's second term was plagued with hostilities between England and France. With the two nations at war, the United States was caught in the middle of a mutual blockade, with both sides harassing American ships and impeding U.S. foreign trade. Despite a British frigate attack on an American vessel, you might remember the Leopard and the Chesapeake incident, Jefferson knew that the U.S. Navy was no match for Great Britain's Royal Navy at the time and did not declare war. He responded with economic sanctions instead. This initial sanction came in the form of the Embargo Act of 1807, which prohibited U.S. trade in foreign ports. The policy was designed to hurt the French and the British, but actually had devastating effects for the American economy and did not really impact the British or French economy as it was intended, and actually ended up being repealed in 1809. The Embargo Act was replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. Kind of a funny name there. This act resumed trade with all countries except France and England. This again was intended to punish France and England by their exclusion. This caused the economy in the U.S. to continue to suffer and actually ended up bringing the nation closer to calls for war. A congressman named Nathaniel Macon introduced Macon's Bill Number 2 in 1810. As economic problems continued, Macon's bill stated that trade should be restored between Britain and France and the U.S. Macon's bill provided that if either U.S. neutral rights at sea, then the U.S. would not trade with that nation's foe. When Napoleon got wind of this, he announced his intentions of revoking the decrees that had violated U.S. neutral rights. Taking Napoleon at his word, Madison carried out the terms of Macon's bill by embargoing U.S. trade with Britain in 1811. However, Madison soon realized that Napoleon had no intention of fulfilling his promise, and the French continued to seize American merchant ships. Macon's Bill Number 2 basically backfired. So headed towards the War of 1812, neither Britain nor the United States wanted their dispute to end in war, and yet war between them did end up breaking out in 1812. So let's talk about the war. Both the U.S. Congress and the U.S. public were also divided on the issue of war, so there was not overwhelming popular opinion in favor of it. From the U.S. point of view, the pressure leading to the war came from two directions: the continued violation of U.S. neutral rights at sea, especially the issue of impressment, and troubles with the British on the western frontier of the United States. So let's talk more about the causes. As a trading nation, the U.S. depended upon the free flow of shipping across the Atlantic. Yet the chief antagonists in Europe, Britain and France, had no intention of respecting the neutral rights of the U.S. as long as they were locked in their ongoing war with each other. They well remembered that Britain had seemed a cruel enemy during the American Revolution, and the French had supported the colonists. In addition, Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans applauded the French for having overthrown their monarchy in their own revolution, similar to what the United States had done in the American Revolution. However, even though both the French and British violated U.S. neutral rights, the British actually did it worse because they more readily used the practice of impressing American soldiers. So again, impressment is forcing entry into the military or public service of individuals. The British would seize American ships and impress their sailors, claiming, and this was almost always false, that the men had deserted the British Royal Navy. So Western frontier pressures, adding to the long-standing grievances over British actions at sea, were the ambitions of the Western Americans for more land, particularly in the Ohio River Valley and towards the Mississippi River and beyond. Americans on the frontier wanted the land of British Canada and Spanish Florida. Standing in the way were the British and their Indian Spanish allies. Conflict with the American Indians was a routine problem for the restless Westerners of the United States. For decades, settlers had been gradually pushing the American Indians further and further westward. In an effort to defend their land from further encroachment, Shawnee brothers, a warrior named Tecumseh, and a religious leader known as the Prophet, attempted to unite all tribes of the east of the Mississippi River. White settlers became suspicious of Tecumseh and persuaded the governor of the Indiana Territory, General William Henry Harrison, who would later become president, to take aggressive action. In the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, this is before the War of 1812, Harrison destroyed the Shawnee headquarters, which ended Tecumseh's efforts to form an Indian confederacy. The British had provided only a little aid to Tecumseh. Nevertheless, Americans on the frontier blamed the British for instigating the rebellion. So now let's talk about those that were in favor of the war and those that were against the war. So first, the Federalists. They favored friendly relations with England in order to preserve lucrative trade links. Remember, many Federalists were Eastern merchants. They originated mostly from the eastern and northeastern United States. They desired a strong U.S. international presence based largely on economic power. So again, the Federalists were against the War of 1812. The War Hawks. Many of these were Democratic Republicans. They favored war with England in order to avenge national insults involving U.S. sailors and British support of Native Americans. Most War Hawks were from southern and western states. They desired a U.S. territorial expansion by means of land acquired through warfare. So a little more about the War Hawks. A congressional election in 1810 had brought a group of new young Democratic Republicans to Congress. Many of them were from the frontier states of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio. Known as the War Hawks because of their eagerness for war, they quickly gained influence in the House of Reps. Led by Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, the War Hawk members of Congress argued that war with Britain would be the only way to defend Americans' honor, gain Canada, and destroy American Indian resistance on the frontier. Now for the declaration of war. British delays in meeting U.S. demands over neutral rights combined with political pressure from the War Hawks finally persuaded President Madison to seek a declaration of war against Britain. Ironically, the British government had by this time, in June of 1812, agreed to suspend its naval blockade. News of its decision reached the White House and Congress after war had been declared. At that point, it was too far to go back. Again, neither Congress nor the American people were united in support of the war. In Congress, Pennsylvania, Vermont joined the Southerners and Western states to provide a slight majority in the declaration of war. Voting against war were most representatives from New York, New Jersey, and the New England states. In the next video, we will go over what the war was like, what the outcome and results of the war, and why the war was so significant.